It's rock and roll!
Greetings, folks, and welcome to episode 16 of Look, It's Rock and Roll podcast. So, as you can see, Mr. Julian Gill, our esteemed host, is not with us. He is tending to a critical fire. So, not a literal one, of course, but a critical fire at work. So, we're going to be taking over and showing him that we can do it. We're a team, right, guys? So, with me today is Mr. Ken Keenan.
Hello.
And on his right, or my right, I don't know how it is on your guys' screen, but we have the ever-pleasant David Donnelly with us today.
Good evening, sirs.
Nice to have you all. And of course, I am Mark Anthony K, or known as Marcus Almighty on the board, the KISS board, if you're referring to that. So I'll be hosting today's affair here. And today we're going to be talking about a record that, truthfully, I don't know a whole heck of a lot, or didn't know a whole heck of a lot about until I started researching it more for this episode. But these two fine gentlemen are a plethora of knowledge and will be giving us all kinds of, tidbits and information in regards to this fine record. And what record are we talking about? We're talking about Sweet and Desolation Boulevard. So, as we talk about this, we will go back to the beginning here, in the beginning of our interactions with this record. So, first question up, gentlemen, is when did your interaction with Sweet actually commence? Let's start off with Ken.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to start with David, but that's fine.
Well, we'll get to him.
Yeah, so my real first, I was thinking back about this, and my first time I noticed Sweet or a song from Sweet was back when they released Little Willie. I remember hearing it on the radio here when I lived in Colorado. So that must have been about 70. I don't know, I'm sure when Willie came out. It could have been 72, 73, somewhere around there, I guess.
It was earlier. It was either 72
or even earlier.
72. I think Funny was 71, and then Little Willie, and then Wigwam Bam 72 as well, I think.
That's when I first heard it, and I remember I heard on the radio, I'm like, wow, this is cool. And then my sisters was like, they're like, oh, no. And then that was kind of I didn't really hear it maybe once or a couple times more on the radio. But at that time, I used to buy the 45s singles. So it was right up my alley, even though I didn't buy it at the time. Because I was listening to stuff like the Raspberries. I had the single Go All the Way and Magic by Pilot and a couple other things, So I was into that catchy stuff. So yeah, that was my first, the first time I noticed Sweet, but I hadn't yet, purchased any music from them yet.
Interesting. So what I'm curious about is, Mr. David Donnelly, since you live in the fine nation of the United Kingdom, and these gentlemen are from this great country of yours, what was your interaction with them?
Well, I was so young, that's the thing. I was so young. I was about 6 years old, I'd say. And funnily enough, my one was just that, like, when I was a little kid, I discovered my dad's drum kit at the age of 5, but we used to play jazz because my dad was a jazz clarinetist, and I hadn't found my music, as it were, but I had started to sit in front of the TV and watch programs like Top of the Pops, which, I think is pretty international, even though it was an English pop show, and I remember I saw Sweet doing Wigwam Bam, and a friend of my sister's, or I think it was the brother of a friend of my sister's, had the single, and I asked him if I could borrow it, because I actually had no records of my own at the time. Obviously I didn't, I had some novelty like Peter Rabbit on red vinyl or something. But no, this was and so I would borrow this single, and it sort of, that was I'd chosen them as my band. That was the band, because I flipped it over. And anyone that knows about Sweet knows that they were allowed to write and record their own B-sides in the early days. And so you got things like New York Connection and Done Me Wrong or Right and stuff like that, which were really heavy, like Deep Purple or something. So it wasn't so much. I suddenly kind of ditched Wigwam Bam and thought, wow, this rock stuff is where it's at, sort of thing. And so I believe I got the Teenage Rampage single for a birthday present or something like that. But it was a long time before I actually managed to start getting the albums. But I will come on to that. And but yeah, basically, I would say around about 1972 was my first sort of realizing that it's like Mick Tucker's big drum kit and just the way they looked and the fact that they annoyed people. I liked it.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing for me, as far as my first interaction with it, again, and most people who watch this podcast or the Kiss podcast will know, and won't be surprised when I refer to this, is that my older sister, once again, was the catalyst in my hearing of this band. And what was the first thing I heard? Well, when she started going into high school, she'd come back home. She had the binder with all the, band names etched on her binder and pen and stuff like that. And she started amassing a rather large 45 collection and a regular 12-inch album collection. Excuse me. And I remember one day being in my room and hearing from inside there this song playing. Are you ready, Steve? And it started playing. I'm like, well, what the hell is that? And then next, Blitzkrieg Bob came on playing.
No, I don't think it did. I don't think it did. Ballroom Blitz came on.
Sorry, that's it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. See how well I know the band. But anyways, when it came on, I right away was connected with it. Like, wow, what is this? Because I had never heard it, and it was because it was so very British. I mean, Jane never got into the whole Japan yet and all those bands yet. She was kind of early in getting into this stuff, right? So it was kind of almost her first sort of introduction to the British end of stuff, because then it came Duran Duran and all those other things later, right? But that was my first introduction to them, was just hearing that single in the house when it was when she first played it. Now, of course, everybody would probably be wondering, of course, Sweet have a pretty interesting collection of albums. There's not only UK versions, but we also have like US versions of the records and stuff like that. Yeah. What was your first Sweet album that you actually owned?
I'll go.
Ken.
My first Sweet album. A few years later, I guess. I think it was 70. I want to say it's 78. I bought Sweet Level Headed, and that was my first Sweet album. And the reason I got it, because the song "Love Is Like Oxygen," which really doesn't sound like any other Sweet song necessarily. It sounds more like ELO. And that's because I was an ELO fan, and I thought it was ELO at first, just the way the way it sounded, and so I bought the album. I thought, oh, okay, and then the songs were totally different. I mean, California Nights and some other songs on there, but they were really good and well written songs and well performed, and I love that album. I really do love that album. So that was the first album I got for them, and then I got Desolation Boulevard after that. But and knowing that, I used to hear these songs on the radio back, when I was younger. But maybe I didn't buy albums at that time. Like I said, I was, sometimes would buy a 45 or something. So Level Headed was the one. And I think I think it's underrated as a Sweet album. Interesting.
David?
Well, this is where I get the opportunity to big up my sisters, because your sister sounds amazing. Your sister sounds absolutely phenomenal. She's liked all that sort of stuff. She's like Joan Jett or something, who's really into Bowie and Sweet and stuff like that. Anyway, but the one time, my sisters are very different, you see. They weren't like that at all. My sister Ruth appreciated the Bay City Rollers. My Helen was really into. She appreciated Cliff Richard,
Mm-hmm.
and my younger sister Gaynor appreciated diapers probably because she was about 2. But basically, my 2 elder sisters for my birthday in 1974, they bought me Sweet Fanny Adams.
Uh-huh.
Nice.
Which is their first sort of proper, I call proper album. They did have, I mean, before this, believe it or not, there was an album called Sweet's Biggest Hits. So there's a really bad one. But
Yes, that's true.
the reason I'm showing this, even though it's not Desolation Boulevard, is this is the copy. This is the copy from 1974 that my sisters gave me.
Oh, wow.
And it's still looking pretty good.
Yeah.
Very nice.
But, so, yeah, that was the first album I got. And that really started the sort of obsession that you get when you're sort of not even a teenager yet, and but you are into music, and it's so frustrating because you haven't got much money and stuff. But there's I don't know whether you want it now, but my story behind Desolation Boulevard. Shall I go for it now?
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
Yeah, well, because because you're probably going to ask, how did you come across Desolation Boulevard? But it was basically I was into Sweet by this point because of the Sweet Fanny Adams one, and my next door neighbour but one was a lad called Richard Cox, the hysterically named Richard Cox. I'd like to think people call him Dick. Just to, but anyway, I don't know what happened to Richard Cox. I didn't see him after I was 11. But anyway, he was sort of like a friend. My mum sort of said, "Oh, there's a lad. He seems to like, go and play with him, sort of thing." When you're about 6 or 7, you have to go and call on the neighbour,
Yeah.
And one day he just produced this Desolation Boulevard album, and I just it was one of those. I'm not proud of it, but I don't care. But I used to go around and say, do you want to come out? Are you free to play, sort of thing? And he'd go, oh yeah, and we go up to his bedroom, and I wasn't interested in whether it was the Chemistry set or whatever that he was showing me, as long as we could put Desolation Boulevard on. And I wasn't from a family where they'd get it for me, so. And the other weird story about that is, again, before I got it, my mum and dad. Like I said, my dad was a jazz musician, and so we used to know quite a few top jazz musicians. And have you ever heard of Cleo Lane?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, all right. So was that a no from both of you?
No, I think Ken said yes.
Yeah, I have.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah. Cleo Lane and Johnny Dankworth. Well, basically, my mum and dad kind of knew them. So she had this big fete one day, and she was on RCA Records. And so she had, on one of these stalls that she'd put up and stuff, she had a raffle. And it was just loads of RCA albums. I remember David Bowie's Young Americans was there. Obviously, a lot of Cleo Lane albums on RCA. And blooming Desolation Boulevard. And I spent all the money my mum and dad had given me, which is just pocket money, buying raffle tickets. And I didn't get it. And it was just horrendous. And then I think the following Christmas it might have turned up. That's when I got it. And again, this is the original. This is the one, and it's got a very tasty gatefold sleeve, and the photo goes through to the back, as it were.
Nice.
And then the only other thing is it's the usual, orange RCA label. Nothing wrong with that. But you did get a lyric sheet.
Yeah.
In this country.
Huh,
and
interesting.
so yeah, my 2 stories about Desolation Boulevard is this poor lad that I used to knock on his door almost on a nightly basis just so I could hear it, because he wouldn't lend it to me, and that Cleo Lane kind of, is unbeknownst to her, tortured me by putting it on her stall. Do you know what the thing is? Because my mum and dad knew, I'm sure if I'd have just gone up to Cleo Lane and just gone, I really, really want that album on there, but I can't. If I give you my pocket money, can I have it? And I'm sure she'd have let me have it.
Yeah.
Because now I understand about promo copies and stuff like that,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
RCA just gave her a box of albums. That's what happened.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway.
So before we go on to the album itself and talk about it a bit more, the one thing that we probably should talk about really quickly is this your favorite Sweet record? And if not, what would you say is your favorite Sweet record?
Yes, it is.
There you go.
Yeah.
Ken?
It's hard. It's really hard. I think like I said, I mentioned Level Headed, and I really like both albums. They're different. They're very different. Um, Desolation is a lot more rocking. Huh?
Ken, this is where me and you go part of the crossroads, because Level Headed was the first album that, because I started at Sweet FA, Sweet Fanny Adams,
right,
and I through the whole lot. Level Headed was the first disappointment
for you.
And they had beards on the front, like one of the Andy Scott had a beard, and it was a black and white photo. I didn't know what was going on.
There's another situation where they turned the album cover was different for the U.S. version and the British version. So the inner gatefold of the American version had the pictures of the guys, right? That was on the cover of your version, but that was on the inside of the gatefold of mine. They had that cool graphic that they did for the outside. But anyway, I have even though they're different, I call it a tie for me. I just love them both so much in their own ways. I think they're both brilliant in their own way. So yeah, I can't pick a favorite, Mark.
Okay. Well, for me, I'm relatively new to the Sweet discography, but I do have the Sweet Fanny Adams, and I do have Desolation Boulevard, and I have the one that's after that one. When the title is
Give Us
eluding
a Wink.
me. Yeah, Give Us a Wink. That's it. And I have them on digital. Boo! I know I don't have any vinyl of them, right? But that's coming up. And that leads me perfectly into our next topic of discussion, because the reason why I don't have Desolation Boulevard yet on vinyl in my collection is because I am hammering hard on the table and saying I am not going to settle for a US copy. I want that blasted UK pressing of the first of that record of Desolation Boulevard. Because the question here that we're going to talk about now is British versus US version. Which version do you prefer and why? And I'm just going to start with this because I was listening to both of them religiously for the last week or so now. Back and forth. And I come to the conclusion that not only with Sweet, but with bands like Whitesnake and other bands that have also had records that came out in UK versions and US pressings, like Slide It In and stuff like that, I've always tended to like the UK versions of the records better. There's something about the guitar sound on the UK pressings that I like better. And when I listen to it, you can hear that Marshall sound, like that really tube amp-ish kind of sound. And when the US pressing version comes on, it sounds like it's a little bit more produced. It's a little bit more compressed, the sound. The drums sound a bit different. They don't sound so, in a nice kind of drum room. It sounds a little bit more smaller, and I don't know. Just the mix of it sounds different to the point of where I just don't enjoy it as much. And that's, I find this happened to me quite a bit, because even with the Beatles stuff, there was big uproar about how the American Capitol Records versions of the Beatles albums were drastically different from the UK ones, right? And I've always preferred the UK ones as well in that situation. So let's go back now this time to David. Out of the UK and the US pressings, and I think I'm going to know what you're going to say, but which of the two versions do you prefer?
It is the British one. It's the UK one. But there are specifics as to why, not just because I've got to go with the British version, And there's a American version of a Manic Street Preachers album, and I'd much prefer the US version, for instance. So I'm not being jingoistic by just sticking by my country. What it is that my favourite track, I'm probably going to blow one of your questions later, but my favourite track is Turn It Down. And Turn It Down isn't on the USA version. And also Ballroom Blitz is. And, depending on how the conversation goes and stuff, one of the things I was going to point out is that, as you probably gathered by the beginning, is I'm not really into their singles. I know it's crazy to say that I'm not into Blockbuster or Ballroom Blitz and stuff. I liked it when they were heavy, and that's why I like the albums, because they would, they would have loved to have been Deep Purple, but they just went. Their kickstart was the glam rock thing and songs that were written by other people and stuff like that. So it's kind of their own fault for going for it. But on the other hand, it's a shame because they were a really good hard rock band. So the reason I like the UK album is because it's even though it's got Fox on the Run on it, it's got a sort of heavy version of Fox on the Run.
Yeah.
And when it came out as a single, they put the keyboard synthesizer thing on it and, made it a bit sweeter. Oh, if you'll excuse the pun.
There we go.
So yeah, it's the UK hands down, but only because, Turn It Down isn't on it, and I can't do without that. That'd be my Desert Island track. And Ballroom Blitz is on it, and it's, yeah. So there you go. That's my answer.
So let's hear what Mr. Ken Keenan says. Is it going to be, a salute to the UK, or is it going to be a US version?
Well, let me start and say I hadn't really heard the full UK version until just recently.
Really?
Really, I didn't really hear it. I just kind of always stuck with the US version. So having said that, though, I have been listening to it a lot the last few weeks, both versions. And I still have to go with the US version.
Yeah.
And it's because of I heard those songs for Ballroom Blitz on the radio a lot.
Yeah.
So and I also heard Fox on the Run, and to me, where David likes the heavier Fox on the Run, I like the sweetened up, again the pun, but version. I think the single version is so much better than the UK album version. That's just, again, that's my taste. Yeah. I like it a little bit slicker and more candy like, I guess you could say. But and then there's other songs on the US version like No You Don't. Now this is the case where you're talking about the versions. I could see what they're trying to do. In the US, they weren't as popular yet, really, in the US.
Yeah.
Like they were in the UK. They were pretty popular, right, at that time?
Oh yeah.
So they're trying to get them, to be a hit over in the US. So what they do is they take, the 5 songs from Sweet Fanny Adams, right?
Yeah.
Album, and put it on the Desolation Boulevard, which they called it here. Even though it's not a true Desolation Boulevard album in a sense, they kind of made it a best of album. Right. It's kind of like a greatest. It's really more like a best of in a way in the U.S. I mean, they could have called it a best of Sweet, I guess, but they're trying to introduce them and get people on board. So yeah, I also you're talking about the versions, different versions. I've had other versions like you talk about of other artists. You mentioned the Beatles and so on. Another one was Neil Sedaka around the same time. He had UK albums, but the albums when Elton John signed him to his record label to put out in the US, they made it like a best of too, in a way, of a compilation on one of this album. So they seem to have done that a number of times. But just to, I guess, finish, the other reasons I like it is because No You Don't. Again, these are songs off of Sweet Fanny Adams. It's like I said, it's just like a greatest hits. And No You Don't was covered by Pat Benatar later on one of her solo albums, which she did a bang up job on that. So there's no lit up in the US version. It just goes. Where listening to the UK version, there's a couple points in there that I kind of have a head scratch on. A couple songs, but we'll get to that.
Well, it's interesting because the one thing that I liked about the UK over the US one is that I thought that the UK version was extremely more daring, in my opinion.
It is.
I mean, I'll give you a case in point. is the very first time I listened to this record and I got to The Man with the Golden Arm.
Yeah.
That was like where I was like, okay, now this is where they radically are different than the Americans, because the American record people are probably saying, Charlie, there's no way in hell we're putting on a song with a 7-minute drum solo on it. You know, we're getting that the hell out of there and we're putting something else in there instead. But for me personally, that shows to me like art. You know, if you're gonna do that on there, I mean, that showed to me that they believed in the band enough that they let them put that on there. It was very James Bondish to me when I heard that the first time.
Yeah, well,
absolutely, like something that came out of off of a movie almost.
yeah,
that
Mark.
kind of a
To
thing.
interject, that is from a movie. The beginning part is from a movie called The Man with the Golden Arm.
Golden Arm, yeah.
That's
okay.
which in that beginning theme before the drum solo kicks in and all that stuff. It was written by Elmer Bernstein. Elmer Bernstein,
yeah.
which is the brother of Leonard Bernstein.
See, there you go.
Elmer wrote a lot of movie soundtracks. He's actually mostly known for writing Western. A lot of the old Westerns, you know, John Wayne and so on. He wrote a lot of that. So that's where that came from. It was just an interesting thing.
Yeah, because I didn't know that, and this is what's fantastic. But that's why I think it was great that I was going to host and you guys talked about it, because you guys have much more knowledge of the music than I do, and I proved it right here. So, I mean, that right away kind of stood out to me that they did something like this on the record, because like I said before, I mean, when I heard this, it took me right back to that conversation that we had before when we were talking about Hotter Than Hell, how Peter Criss saying, I wanted a drum solo on Strange Ways.
You probably heard the Sweet album.
Maybe he heard this album and he said, well, if he can have a drum solo on there for 5 minutes, I want a drum solo on it, you know.
Mick Tucker is pretty good, though. That's the thing.
He is.
Oh, it was
It
great.
was a good drum solo. I agree.
And I don't know whether you know that, but even back in 74, 75, when they, or 75 particularly, I suppose, because of this album, but when they did it live, the technology they used, which was cutting edge at the time, but, ridiculous now if you think about it, but because it was an impossible, like Bohemian Rhapsody, it's an impossible track to do totally live. So they had a tape of the orchestra bit, the brass bits and stuff, but the band would join in and play the bit and there. And then when Mick Tucker went into his drum solo, there was a screen above, and they synced it up so that basically he would kind of play drums against himself. So the recording would play a little bit, and then he'd do the next bit. Because there's bits in the solo, if you know the solo, where it sounds like it's question and answer type thing. He goes,
Okay.
and so even back then, they had quite a good stage show for that. I mean, it's amazing, really.
Great, yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, these are our first impressions of it, and now that we've kind of put that, issue to rest, let's kind of go and dive in deeper into this record now, and we'll start with this kind of question. What were your first impressions when listening to this album, either now or then, as far as, let's start with the sound of the record. What were your first impressions of the sound of this album? Let's go back to Ken first with this.
Well, the sound it's pretty darn good. I mean, it's pretty, crunchy kind of rock for me, at least on the pressing I have. I can't tell you who produced it, but I know David was showing the version, and actually, it was on RCA over there, where in the United States it's on Capitol, Capitol Records. So, I mean, it sounded. They made it all sound the same. I guess they did a good job of leveling it, because when you combine multiple albums of material, singles, because you have a couple singles here, then you have the Sweet Fanny Adams mixed in, and then the other normal Desolation, which is only 3 songs between the UK and the US version are the same between the 2 albums.
The Sweet Fanny Adams was produced by Phil Wayman, and Desolation Boulevard was Mike Chapman.
Yes, so there you go. I mean, so whoever, and I could have to check into it, but so whoever did the job of putting it together had it all make it sound, pretty pretty good. It made me think that it was all done at the same time. Though I didn't know back when I first listened to it all the details about it or anything. We didn't have Wikipedia or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So, David, impressions of the sound the first time?
Well, obviously, you got to go again. I defend myself with that. I just loved everything about it because I was 7 years old. I didn't really know how you made records or that sort of thing. So it's really weird to say then because I was so young. I didn't really know a lot, but it was magical for me, especially the drum solo, the way that the toms were mixed left to right and that sort of stuff, and then it had gongs in it and timpanis and stuff, and then the guitar sound was really fat and what have you, and which is weird. I mean, Andy Scott used to use Marshalls and stuff like that, but he also used to use a pig nose. If anyone, I don't know, guitarists listening would know what a pig's nose is, which is it's a dressing room amp basically.
It's a little small thing.
It's an amp you have in a dressing room to warm up, but. So he was an interesting, and like the guitar solo on "Turn It Down," for instance, is just mad. He goes, he was a great rock guitarist. So to then, my answer to then, it was absolutely amazing. And now when I listen to it, I still really enjoy it. But it's quite weird. I sort of think, God, the drums are really dry. Like on that drum solo, you can, and also there's a couple of clicks of the stick where he goes around the kit, and he obviously just. No, most people have stopped and done it again, but maybe time wasn't on their side. I mean, it's not really a mistake. It's just that I know exactly what he did because I've done it. You accidentally clack your sticks together when you're doing something a bit flashy. But amazing control and cover of My Generation at the end, fantastic. And now I would say I understand that it's it's probably done on 16 track. If not 8 track sort of thing, but probably 16 track, and that the sound is them being recorded as they sounded, probably sort of thing. But I wouldn't really want to do anything to it. But it's it's raw. It's pretty raw, and I like that. So yeah.
Yeah, didn't they? I read somewhere that they recorded a lot of the stuff more live.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, as far as my first impression, I think I have the benefit that I'm actually a very new comer to the whole Suite thing. So for me, my first impressions are pretty recent, actually. And like I said before, when I first heard this record, the British version of it, I was like, wow. Like, the guitar sounds I immediately fell in love with. I love that kind of raw Marshall sound, with the Les Paul, or even if it's I'm pretty sure it's a Les Paul he probably used. It sounds like it to me.
He did like a Strat from time to time. But
I was gonna say it could be a Strat as well, right? But I kind of like that 70s dry drum sound that was very standard for the day, that kind of drum sound, right? But I mean, it got me to so interested in it. I was kind of even trying to figure out, where did they record this? What kind of board did they use there? I got so interested in it because I really liked this kind of raw, in your face, and that's why I immediately took to it more than I did the US one, because the US one I kind of envisioned, someone like John Kalodner coming in and saying, okay, guys, we got to really clean this up a bit. It's got to sound really polished for radio. You know what I mean? Like, I can imagine someone like that coming in and saying that for it. So, yeah, my first impressions were I really dug the sound of the UK version. Now, since the sound and the production is kind of hand in hand with this, because, the production on these records are pretty raw. It's pretty, live performances and stuff like that. So I think that we kind of covered our opinions on that while we discovered the sound of it. But let's go on to the singles. Julian put down here 3 songs. He put The 16s, Turn It Down, and Fox on the Run. So let's talk about those. So what are your opinions on, for example, The 16s? David, let's go to you.
There's The 16s.
Okay.
Backed with Burn on the Flame.
Oh, okay.
Which is on the special edition of Desolation Boulevard, if you want to check out the B-side of that. Yeah, 16s was fantastic. I mean, like I say, it's my answers are going to be quite similar in that sort of I just was obsessed by this album at that age, And today I still find the 16s. Yeah, it's a bit of a soppy song, maybe about sort of coming of age or whatever, and all that sort of stuff. The song about Bobby and Billy, and all that sort of thing. But it's kind of, for the time, I loved it. It was a story and also it had a lot of changes in it as well. It wasn't just verse, chorus, all that sort of stuff. It was a kind of intelligent, sweet single, really, and it kicks off the album. So it's a good one to kick off with.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the one thing that I noticed immediately is that, you had the US one that has 16 after Ballroom Blitz, right?
Yeah.
And, that it got bumped by there. I mean, I guess in the US it made sense to do that, but, Ken, what are your thoughts on the 16s?
Well, the 16s, and I don't know if they released it as a single in the US, but I guess these are the singles as they were released in England. So the 16, I think, the 16s is a great song. That is on the US version, so I'm very aware of it, and I think it's a great song. It's a catchy tune, and I can see why they released it as a single. I like it a lot. I think the other day, I think it was last week, I was listening, and then I wasn't listening, but then I kept hearing that song in my head. So obviously it's catchy. It was like, oh man, I'm hearing that song. So, but yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, definitely.
Good choice.
I mean, now Turn It Down, which is listed here as one of them, is one that's on the UK one, but according to the list here, it is not listed on the US version of the record.
I mentioned this point. That's why I like the UK version,
Yeah, so I guess if we go to David, as far as that single, there you go.
There you go. Turn It Down with Someone Else Will on the back.
So I'm guessing that your answer, David, is that this is a huge favorite, obviously, of yours.
Oh, it was quite sort of, when you think that it was 1975. I think it was written in 74. But it was kind of it. That's why I liked punk rock. I think is because it was probably one of the most simple songs there, but the riff in it, and then the solo in it, and the kind of quite one of the things that Sweet let themselves down on sometimes was their sort of almost Gene Simmons-esque lyrics.
Yes, yeah.
And lyrical prowess was not good sometimes, and you just sort of think, that went down on the back of a cigarette packet 10 minutes before the studio closed. I just thought it was really good, this one, and it's just that riff again. Like I say, I'd never heard anything like it. It was so heavy to me, and it shows that it was the wrong one to release, I suppose, because it got to the lower reaches of the chart. It was their first flop in terms of singles. They obviously pulled it back, but that was. And I must say, when I saw it in the shop, I was the right age for it. I was looking through the singles and saw Turn It Down. I didn't even know it had come out. And one of the reasons was because the British radio and press and whatever are so uptight that it got banned from Radio 1, which is the only station that it got. Yeah, it got banned for the phrase "for God's sake."
Oh no!
Boy. Wow!
The line of the chorus is "So for God's sake, turn it down." But they didn't have a go at the Beach Boys for "God Only Knows,"
or Lou Reed.
True.
It's like there's just for God's sake. People say it all the time. Oh, for God's sake,
Yeah.
I don't know, but anyway, that for the BBC, they just felt that might offend their delicate listeners' ears. So. So there you go. It just didn't get promoted and what have you. So, but I honestly think it's my favourite track on the album. It's my favourite single of theirs. And if I had to take, say, 10 singles to a desert island, it would be one of them.
Wow.
Very good. So there you go. So, Mr. Keenan, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, Turn It Down. In listening to the UK version, I like the song, but I understand why it flopped. It's really not single material. Though it's a good rockin' song and a cool song, like you said, there's great riffs in it and so on. But I just as far as a single, that's kind of a head scratcher, them picking that over I obviously later I guess they did Fox on the Run, But I guess that was maybe their only other choice, because they're not going to put the man with the golden arm as a single. That's impossible.
No, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But they did one thing that Julian didn't write down, but he probably knew, but he probably thought, well, it's not really relevant. But around this time, Andy Scott actually did release Lady Starlight as a single. And it was on RCA Records, and that always confused me. I mean, that must have caused some friction within the band, because the track is on the album as Sweet.
Yeah.
But he released it as an Andy Scott solo single at around that time, you know.
What's interesting about that song is when I first heard it, and it's not on the U.S. version either, but when I first heard it, I thought, this sounds like something that is going to be coming in the future, which was a little bit of that level-headed sound and the way that the song goes. I thought, oh, that's interesting. There's kind of a hint.
Yeah, but I have to say, I appreciate it now. But when I first heard it, I have to say, because it's the rock stuff that I like. When I first heard it, I thought it sucked like a porn star.
Right. Yeah.
It was. It wasn't my favourite, so I used to skip it if I could, sort of thing. But I mean, now I realise it's a good song. It's well produced. It's nice. It's I've got more time for it now.
Interesting. So, of course, that takes us to the final single mention, which is, of course, Fox on the Run, a song that's very familiar to, people who like Sweet. And, of course, it's very familiar to people who are into Ace Frehley, as he also covered it on his Anomaly record, I believe. And
yes, he did. Right.
And a nice Desolation Boulevard back sleeve.
Look at that. Very nice.
That's the German.
Nice.
So, and as we mentioned before, there are two versions of this song. There's a US version and a UK version.
Yeah.
So I guess your impressions of this, will vary on, first of all, which version of it you like, and your thoughts on it. So I guess let's go to David. What were your first impressions on Fox on the Run?
Well, I mean, I first heard it on the album, so I love the album. I love the album version, and it's heavy. It's only maybe two guitars, and it's like a band playing in a room, that sort of stuff. And but because they did a really good job on the single, I love the synthesizer at the beginning, all that sort of stuff, and the fact that there's a keyboard riff instead of the going straight into the main heavy riff and stuff. So, if you ask me which is my favourite, it's the Desolation Boulevard version, because it's the original and what have you. But I love what they did with the English single, and the single, or whichever one.
Yeah.
So really good, and but there's there's a couple more guitar overdubs on there. There's keyboards on there, and there's I think the block harmonies are sort of a bit more reverb and stuff. They went to. I believe they did re-record it, didn't they? They did. It's not an added. They didn't add stuff to the original version.
I don't know.
It sounds like a re-recorded, because it's a little different.
Sorry, that was my subtle way of saying I know they re-recorded it, but I didn't want to sound arrogant.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That's very correct. British of you. So, Ken, your opinion?
Yeah, well, I kind of mentioned it earlier in this, in the show here, but that I heard that version, the single version, on the radio when I was probably about 12 or 13, whatever. So, and I really loved it, and like you said, the way the synthesizer leads into the song, and then it kicks in, and it is a lot between the two versions. It's a lot, I want to say, thicker.
It is. It's a better production.
Yeah, thicker. Yeah, and more guitars, and like you said, David, I noticed they had the vocal, a lot of more harmonies, stuff going on in the song, and again, that's kind of stuff that just I was like, ooh, give me more of that stuff, because that's what I like. So I just love that song. One of my favorite songs by the band. So. But the other version was different. It was kind of a shock in a way, hearing the UK version, because I was so used to the, the single. It was like, oh, wow, why did they do that? It's the kind of thing.
Well, the single short,
but it was
as well.
okay. Yeah.
I think the album version would have struggled as a single because it's pretty long. It's 5 minutes something, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is considerably longer. I mean, the thing about it I found interesting was that I had known the American version because Ace did his version based on the American one. His version of it is very much more along the lines of the American version of how it's played out and laid out. And that's why when I heard the UK version of it, I was like, ooh, this is different. And I actually liked it better because I kind of liked that they didn't have the keyboards there and stuff like that. And I liked the bass line a lot better in the UK one, what he's playing underneath there, and the chorus part and all that, and all those parts in there. He has a very good bass line in this song. But, the song is pretty important. Obviously, it was pretty popular. There is a Top of the Pops performance of it as well, I think that they did, where they're obviously miming it because there's a part where they zoom over to the guitar player who's supposed to be playing the keyboard part at one point, and he clearly walks away from the keyboard and still playing the keyboard part, like pretending he's air keyboard playing. So obviously he wasn't too thrilled with having to mimic it, I think. But, it obviously helped them. Get the more notoriety.
They had a good sense of humour, though. They always used to do something on Top of the Pops because they did think it was a really kind of weird thing to be doing, miming to your record when you're really good musicians, and so Andy Scott in particular, Steve Priest used to dress up ridiculously and just go over the top, but Andy Scott's thing was always some sort of funny thing. So the moving away from the keyboard while still playing it, that's one thing. But there's another one, I think it's Blockbuster, where you suddenly realise halfway through he's got an extra leg, and he got someone to sew on an extra leg, or it's an extra arm comes over or something. So someone in the costume department or whatever just fixed this up, and it's so they were always kind of playing a few tricks on the Top of the Pops people because they thought it was a bit daft,
Yeah, interesting. So we kind of talked about what we thought were our favorite songs from these records and stuff like that. So I think it'd be kind of pointless to point out again what our favorite songs are from the record. But one thing we haven't talked about, and that's always an interesting discussion when it comes to records like this, especially for people like David who love this record so much, and Ken as well, is do you have anything on this record that you strongly dislike? If you do, what two things do you think you would pick that are the dislikes on this record? Let's go to Ken.
Oh, okay.
All right. Okay. I'm going to say, at least on the US version, but it's hard. I like the whole thing pretty much, but I'll just say Into the Night, maybe. And then that's about it from there. I mean, on the UK version, that's a tough one too. I think, the Man with the Golden Arm thing that was kind of like, why are they doing that? But I think some other, bands or artists were doing that kind of stuff at the time. I think Alice Cooper did something like that. He did like a West Side Story kind of thing on. Yeah. It was on the School's out or one of his albums and stuff like that. And then, but I don't think they really needed to do My Generation. It was too soon, I think, to do the Who.
There is a story. There is a story behind why they did that.
Okay, yeah. So that's my pick. I mean, maybe you can tell the story about that, David. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just Pete Townsend really liked Sweet, and he actually asked them to support the Who at Charlton Football Club, which is quite a famous gig of theirs. And I think it would have, done them good. But unfortunately, that just beforehand, Brian Connolly got involved in a pub fight, and they knew who he was, and the people who were fighting with him kicked him in the throat.
Oh no!
And he wasn't ready for the gig. But the thing is, they decided to do My Generation, and Pete Townsend had agreed to. He was going to play on it. It was going to be Sweet and Pete Townsend doing My Generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pete Townsend backed out of it, and they just thought, let's do it anyway. So, it wasn't initially a throwaway track. It was going to be a bit of a sort of, and Sweet have got Pete Townsend on their album. But the the actual collaboration didn't happen, and the Charlton Football Club stadium gig didn't happen. But they went ahead and did My Generation anyway, so that's why it's on there.
Okay, interesting.
So
I hadn't heard that.
So then, what would you say are your two dislikes, if there's any dislikes for you on this, David?
Well, it's tricky. It's tricky because I was thinking like my top three songs on the UK one be Turn It Down, obviously Man with the Golden Arm and Breakdown, because that's great. And on the US, obviously my favourite three would be three different ones: Set Me Free, Into the Night, and Solid Gold Brass. And I think Into the Night, probably, to be fair, Ken, although you said you weren't really that keen on it, I think the reason I like it is I actually went to Mick Tuckle's funeral, and they played that as the last song.
Okay.
It was just right, and it just sounded amazing in the church. And I just, ever since then, I kind of like zoomed in on that track. I thought it was
That's interesting. Cool. Yeah.
So, but yeah, the ones I didn't like were Lady Starlight, and I'd say even now 16s. But it's just it's like I've heard it too much. It's like Sweet Child of Mine or any
Rock
other
Roll All
song.
Night.
I've heard the 16s so many times. And it got, even at the time, it got played an awful lot. And because it was a single, I'd got it, and I was playing it over and over.
Yeah.
So yeah, but really, it's just those two, Lady Starlight and the 16s, and still, to be honest, I would not skip them these days if I put the album on. I'd play the whole thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. For me, the two dislikes, it's funny because how I kind of picked them was, because I'm still so new to the record still, is I figure that the ones that I can't think off the top of my head how they go are obviously not connecting with me. So I kind of took it like those are the ones I'm probably going to say are the ones I dislike. So number one that I didn't like was also My Generation. I just kind of thought that it was, like Ken said, I kind of agree with him. I think it was kind of an early kind of cover to do, considering that it wasn't that long ago that the Who did that. And now I understand why it happened thanks to David's fantastic
different with Pete
story.
Townsend on it.
Yeah, of course. But for me, the other song that kind of has I've heard it and it hasn't registered for whatever reason, and maybe it's because I'm just not clicking with it, is I Want to Be Committed. I don't know what it is about that song, but it's just not. It's just something about it is just not doing it for me. I mean, there's nothing on these records that I would say are terrible, that I would say are thumbs down completely, but that one to me is probably more on the weaker end of things.
I absolutely agree, and I didn't sort of say it at the time. Yeah, if I was going for like my least favourite on the US version, I'd say I Want to Be Committed. And it's annoying because at the time, I remember when it came out on Strung Up Suite, and it also came out on the American edition. It was a track that we'd never heard in the UK, and it was like, what it's like when we realise there's a track we've not heard by our favourite band. And I went to the End of the Earth tracking it down, and when I finally stuck the headphones on and heard it, I just remember thinking, well, this isn't very good. It's like a demo of a song, isn't it, really? And it's just the really hysterical vocals in it. And that's why I'd say, when we're talking about the UK and the US version of Desolation Boulevard, if anyone is watching this and they're thinking, do you know what, this sounds quite good, I'll give it a go. It won't cost you much. Just buy a copy of Sweet Fanny Adams and buy a copy of the English Desolation Boulevard. The only track you won't get is I Want to Be Committed, and you're not missing anything.
Very interesting that you pointed that out. Because that does probably save people quite a bit, and even like you said, you're not missing out on a song that's all that necessary to hear, right? So, interesting question here, and I'm very interested to hear your guys' opinion on it because you're obviously more schooled in the whole Sweet history and stuff like that. So Julian put down, the album bookends the Chapman Chin era with Give Us a Wink. It saw the band become fully independent because they ditched Mr. Chapman at that point, right? So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that it was necessary for them to ditch Mr. Chapman and go their own way? Do you think that was a good move on their part? Because obviously when I listened to Give Us a Wink, that there were differences in it like immediately when I heard it. As far as some of the songwriting, the production of it was really much more like, whoa. It was much more like in your face more than some of the prior stuff that I was listening to. Thoughts, let's go to David. I'm curious on this. We'll get over to you to Ken obviously, but let's go to David first. What are your thoughts on this whole abandoning Mr. Chapman.
Yeah, well, at the time, at the age that I was, I loved it. I enjoyed Give Us a Wink. I enjoyed For the Record, which was the next one. Off the Record, sorry. I can't believe I got that wrong. Off the Record. And those two were great, but they were, like you say, they were all self-composed. And in hindsight, it's impossible because there's too many egos involved. But they should have written together. I think they should have let Sweet go for the metal edge that they wanted to go, or the rock edge, because things now I realise when I listen to Give Us a Wink now and I listen to Off the Record, some of the lyrics are dreadful. They could really do with a lyric writer in there steering them the right way, and some of the songs either go on too long, and you sort of just know that if there was a producer, because they produced these albums themselves, the engineer was Mac, I think, who did all the Queen stuff, Mac, who worked with Queen, and it's so I do think it was a mistake, but I don't think they should have carried on letting Chin Chap. They had a hit with Fox on the Run. They wrote that, and then Action was a hit off Give Us a Wink, and that was a hit. But the other songs now I see were quite weak, but at the time I just loved it. I loved it all. So the bottom line is I think it was a mistake, and if it could have been at all sorted, which I just can't see it could have, maybe write together. Maybe write together.
Mr. Keenan.
So the Michael Chapman thing where they I guess stopped you. I mean, it was a smart move at the beginning to have them. I mean, just great songwriter. Obviously, and on the U.S. version, the whole first side of the album is the Mike Chapman Chin stuff. The whole second side of the album is all the band's written material. They split it up like that. I don't know why, or it came out that way. But as they, dismissed Chapman and the band started just writing its own material, I guess Chapman must have went on to Pat Benatar, which I mentioned earlier, because her first album,
Blondie Parallel Lines.
And Blondie, because he wrote, they used No You Don't on Pat Benatar's first album. They also used another song, If You Think You Know How to Love Me. Another song, I guess it was a band, Smokey. They had done that.
The weird thing is, though, that Phil Wayman produced Sweet Fanny Adams, which is what No You Don't is off.
Right.
So you'd have thought he'd have chosen one of his own produced albums, but
So, and then Mike Chapman was producing, that Pat Benatar album too. So anyway, he went on and obviously to other good things. So the music, I think it's a good thing that they went on to do their own stuff. It's kind of more consistent. It makes the music more consistent, and they were pretty good songwriters. They did a good job.
Interesting, because like I said, I don't know too much about the back history of it, but the one thing that I'm kind of finding telling, at least for myself, is when I pop up the discography, you have Funny How Sweet Coco Can Be from 1971. You have Sweet Fanny Adams 74, Desolation Boulevard 74, Give Us a Wink 76, Off the Record 77, Level-Headed 78, Cut Above the Rest 1979. Then you have something here called Water's Edge, titled Sweet 6, with a different cover in the United States in 1980. And then you have Identity Crisis in 1982. Now, beyond Give Us a Wink, I didn't even have a clue of any of these records. Is that because by that point this was just merely a very popular band in the UK and they were a dead issue in the United States? Fill me in on this. Let's start with David on that.
Level-Headed is where the last time they really toured the US and played to decent crowds. I'm not even sure they went back after that, because Brian Connolly was ejected or left, depending on, but he had a serious alcohol problem, and he messed up a very, very important gig for the record company and what have you at I don't know, Santa Monica Civic Center, I think was possibly the one, and they really played badly, and all the people looking after them in America saw it. Brian was singing the wrong song to the wrong tune, and stuff like that. They're just really bad. And so once he'd left, to be honest, Cut Above the Rest, Water's Edge, and Identity Crisis, I literally just bought a box set of those albums with Level Headed because they were on Polydor Records. They switched to Polydor for Level Headed. And but I bought them because I'm a fan of Mick Tucker's drumming and Andy Scott's guitar work, but they're not great. They're fun to have in the car when you've got an hour journey to kill. But really, I think Sweet was over with Level Headed. That's my thought, really. Off the Record's pretty good. It's got some good stuff on it and what have you. But it's the Brian Connolly era, the blonde lead singer. Yeah. Once he'd gone and they became a three-piece and Steve Priest took over vocals. No disrespect to Steve Priest, incredible bass player, and a very good backing singer, but yeah, not a front man, sadly. Because by that point as well, he'd got a sort of afro of ginger hair and a great big sort of cock duster moustache, which I believe they call them in San Francisco. But a great big scrubbing brush moustache, and it was just, they looked awful. They just looked like musos, they'd lost the whole sort of thing. Yeah. So I've got those very last three albums, non-Connolly albums, because I'm a collector, but that's pretty much the only reason.
So, going over to Ken here, being that you are a U.S. citizen, obviously, and being a follower of Sweet, did you notice that? Did you start finding that Sweet was maybe a little bit more difficult to find in the record stores after that time period? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, after Level Headed, I think, and I liked Level Headed, but I thought the album after it was a big drop off for me in songwriting and so on. I think my friend had it. I guess I probably would have bought it, but he brought it over and he was playing it, and I'm like, yeah, it's a little bit like, but then it's like something's not, something's missing here. Yeah, so I ended up not even getting the album after that, and I need to go back and revisit some of those albums. I haven't restocked all my vinyl collection.
I mean, Identity Crisis is a good rocking album. They're a very final one, and you'd think it would be the worst, but it's actually, it's a shame. They were doing good stuff, but their label had let go of them, and I don't think they got management at that time. They had to just call it a day after that. But but both the Cut Above the Rest has got two different sleeves as well. One for the Americans, one for the English.
Yeah, again, and they have different flip flop track listings too. That the tracks are in a different order between the UK and the US version. So,
but at the time, Identity Crisis was only ever released in Germany, so there's no way you'd have seen it.
Yeah. We wouldn't have seen it. I don't ever remember seeing it in record stores.
It's not a bad one to get if you see it for a decent.
I'll check it out. Yeah.
Now, one more thing I'm going to ask really quickly before we wrap things up is something that I noticed on here that was very interesting. Is in the wiki, they have a section here about the brief reunion, and that's of Brian Connolly, Mick Tucker, and Steve Priest. It says here, Mike Chapman contacted Connolly, Priest, Scott, and Tucker in '88, offering to finance a recording session in Los Angeles. Okay, and it said that when they got in the airport and picked them up, that they said, "Oh my God, here comes Brian, and he was old, kind of ghostly white, and he looked terrible." And then, they did a rework of Action and Ballroom Blitz, and then it became clear that Connolly's voice and physical health were, terrible, and consequently the reunion attempt was aborted. Now, the thing that I find interesting about that is that when you look in the other section on the wiki, they have like other versions of Sweet, like Steve Priest Sweet from 2008 to 2020. Then you go up here and it says here you have the new Sweet, Brian Connolly's 84 to 1997. Now, was this something that happened because after the last album, like that 82 record, did they have like some kind of enormous fallout and everybody was kind of battling for the name? Because I'm not aware of this history. Was that what kind of happened? Like everybody saying, no, I want to continue, no, I want to continue, no, I want to continue, but not with each other?
No, I can give you. I don't know. Ken, do you know the full story on this, or shall I fill in?
No, I don't know the full story. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll try and keep it brief because it's a bit. But basically, yeah, Brian Connolly leaves, leaving the band as a three-piece. They do 3 more albums for Polydor. Polydor drop them after that. They go and they call it a day. Everyone just decides to call it a day. By this point, Steve Priest has got married to an American lady and he's living in the States. So Andy Scott and Mick Tucker, about, so I don't know, just a few years later, decide that they're going to put a version of Sweet together, and they get a couple of sort of, you know, guys from sort of low end sort of heavy metal bands from England, sort of thing, you know, and they go out on tour as Sweet, and that's cool. And then Brian Connolly decides after quite a while, although he was in no fit state to do it, that he also wants to. So he went out as either Brian Connolly Sweet or the New Sweet, I think was one, and then BC Sweet. And Andy Scott had to go out as Andy Scott Sweet. But Andy Scott Sweet, to be honest, was the only one worth seeing. Poor old Brian, he was doing holiday camps and things like that. It was just really sad and like, just not great musicians behind him either and stuff. So the Andy Scott lineup was the one to think. Much later, somewhere like in the 2000s, was when Steve Priest, without moving back to England, without any real sort of wanting to get somewhere with it, he just formed Steve Priest Sweet, got some three heavy metalers around him and stuff. And I've seen YouTube clips of Steve Priest Sweet. It's not bad, actually. Not bad. But they only really played LA and stuff like that. That's where he was. He never came back home, basically. So there was no problem with Steve Priest's Sweet because it wasn't clashing with Andy Scott's Sweet, because Andy Scott's Sweet didn't really play America. They were very big in Germany, very good in Europe and around Britain and stuff. So, you know, that was it. And obviously with Brian and Mick passed away, I'm sure Steve and Andy just said, well, you stay on your side of the board, you know, on your side of the Atlantic, and I'll stay on mine. You know. So that's if that clears it up for anybody, that's the chronology of what happened, basically.
Interesting. So,
but,
yeah, because
I've got that 1988 recording. Oh, my God. It's so sad because the music is phenomenal. The instrumentation of it. Oh my God, Brian Connolly's vocals. It's honestly, it's dreadful. He really has. It's not just that he can't hit. Even auto-tune wouldn't have helped him. He just it sounded like it gargled with sort of sandpaper or something, and you can tell that they're really not happy with it. The beginning of Ballroom Blitz, it goes, "Are you ready, Steve? Bollocks." And then I think, Andy, and someone goes, "Fuck off, you cat." It's really bad.
Oh, no.
But yeah, I do have it. I have those 2 recordings, and they're just sad to listen to, because it would have been the musicians, as in the instrumentation guys, the 3 of them were still really good, really good, you know, better than they were, sort of thing. And if Brian's voice could have matched it in the same way that Ian Gillan's matched it those amount of years afterwards. But the trouble is, the guy, I've seen it in my own world, unfortunately, is drink will ruin everything if you don't stop when they tell you need to stop. And he never did stop, you know.
It definitely does. And I think we can all agree that we've seen one too many of our favorite musicians go down that rabbit hole and end up, you know, in a bad way at the end of the day.
And a few friends, unfortunately, in my case.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I think we can all say that, you know, whether they're musicians or not. So, yeah, so I think that's about it. I think we wrapped up quite a lot about this record and then some about Sweet, which I think is fantastic for people who are watching, because people who are probably in my state who are like new to the band will probably very much enjoy this sort of look back at the records. And as you can see here, we have Ken and David holding up the respective pressings of the albums.
Oh no! I was telling Ken earlier on. This is a confusing one. This is because this is the nice original with the gatefold and the English edition.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is also the English edition, but it's a cheap one, and it's got no gatefold, and it's got the English track listing.
Oh, really?
price version. Yeah, I've got the American CD,
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
I've got the really nice reissue CD that has
That one. Yeah.
all that stuff and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I've also got the sort of English sort of CD. But Mark, if you don't mind, just before you go,
Yes.
a couple of recommendations for people. This box set, the Wild Bunch, it's called. It is what it says. It's basically all the Sweet albums, including Desolation Boulevard, which I obviously pulled out of it, plus an exclusive live album and sort of BBC sessions and stuff. But it is all the Connolly stuff on RCA, so it just hasn't got Level-Headed. And also, I think if we're talking Desolation Boulevard era, I definitely recommend Strung Up Suite, which is the live album, which is like disc 1 is the live album with all the heavier stuff on it, and the studio album is a lot of tracks such as Action, Fox on the Run, Set Me Free, Misdemeanor, all that sort of stuff. And if you really want it, I Want to Be Committed, and that's the original that I've got. And this one is a new one, which is like, if you're like me and you like to get the nice 180 gram, this is purple sparkle vinyl.
Ooh.
And it's got a different inner sleeve as well with a picture that, I mean, it's just great. And finally, this is just really for other people who might be interested in stuff. If you want to know the story, that's the best book. There's a few out,
Blockbuster.
but it's called Blockbuster: The True Story of Sweet, and it's by a guy called Dave Thompson. There's his name at the bottom there, Dave Thompson.
There you go. Yeah.
I don't know who Dave Thompson is, but he clearly knows his stuff. And I've read quite a few Sweet books that have come out by fans and stuff like that. But this is really comprehensive with all the tour dates, all about the tours, and pretty much everything you'd want to know.
Well, you know that box set you showed with all the albums. They're charging over $700 for that in the U.S.
What?
Yeah, it's hard to find. I think right now. I don't know. I think
Great book
they
as
did.
well. Really nice.
They didn't press. I guess it's they're not pressing any new ones of that.
Wow.
I believe it because years back they had a Genesis box that came out, like a reissue of the certain eras of the Genesis recordings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now if you go on like some of these sites and try to buy them, like some of the versions of it, like the blue one that has like the Trick of the Tail and Wind and Weathering, like it's like insane. It's like $600 for the vinyl reissue. It's like, so I can understand that, because I was just about to say before Ken said that maybe I'll go and buy that CD box that David just showed. But if it's $700 American, there's just no way in hell I'm going to be buying that.
That's insane. I mean, if I see it on this side of the pond for something pretty reasonable, I'll ask you if you'd like it, and that sort of thing. Because I actually bought it for £64, which is, I don't know, what, $80 or something.
Sounds about right.
Like that. Yeah. So it was. It wasn't something that I just whipped a few sort of £50 notes out of my back pocket. But it was. But it was definitely worth it when you think what all the stuff you get in there, and it's already. I've pretty much got everything in it. But it's just such a lovely package, and it is nice to be able to hear all that.
Cool.
Excellent. So on that really good, informative note, we will end this episode.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us. Of course, if you have any comments about this record and you have any kind of things to add to it, then feel free to leave your comments below or leave it on the Look It's Rock and Roll podcast Facebook site, and I'm sure that we'll get back to you with some sort of comment. Well, more likely David and Ken than me, because I don't know too much about it. But this was a very enjoyable episode, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming on and doing this with me.
Loved it. Because I really wanted to do this one, and Ken knows that as well, and Julian knows that as well. And just this is the album that meant the most to me, and the reason why I'm doing what I do now, I think.
And just for something that we should have mentioned, this was actually David's pick for this episode. He picked the album for this episode. I was
going to be surprised.
Yeah, so I guess we'll leave it at that. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all very soon for another episode of Look It's Rock and Roll Podcast. Until then, thank you, and we will talk to you all much later.
See ya.
Thank you for watching or listening to this episode. Be sure to subscribe to us, like us, or even leave us a review. You can find us and join the conversation on Facebook.